The thief was supposed to be in control that night. Gun pressed to the neck, adrenaline spiking, a luxury car on a dark, rainy street. It wasn't a setup. It wasn't a trap. It was just a mistake, the single worst calculation of his life. Seconds ticked by. The rain drummed against the roof. The city lights smeared across the windshield. Then, silence. The woman in the driver's seat didn't gasp. She didn't tremble. She didn't speed up. She should have begged for her life. Any sane person would have. Instead, she calmly engaged the child locks, adjusted the rearview mirror, and whispered the last words he expected to hear. You picked the wrong car. He didn't know her face. But when his eyes met hers in the glass, cold, dead, and utterly bored, the desperate thief realized something terrifying. He wasn't holding a gun to a victim. He was holding a gun to Alara Vescari. And for the first time in his life, the person with the weapon was the one who was trapped. That reflection would change both their fates. Because the fear that began in that rearview mirror would force a disposable thief to choose between dying alone or taking up a task no one ever walks away from. Before we drive into the darkness, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment "Justice" if you're ready. Now, let's get started. The audible thud click of the central locking system was the loudest sound in the world. It severed the connection to the rainy street outside, sealing the cabin into a pressurized tank of expensive leather and silence. Nico yanked the handle. It gave a useless, plastic resistance. He yanked again, harder, panic rising in his throat like bile. Nothing. Child locks, the woman said. She didn't look back. She didn't even blink. Her hands remained at 10 and 2, guiding the heavy sedan through the slick curves of the industrial district with surgical precision. Standard feature. Insulting, usually. Necessary, tonight. Stop the car, Nico stammered. The gun in his hand felt suddenly heavy, like a prop in a play where he had forgotten his lines. I said stop the car, or I'll shoot. No, you won't, she replied. It wasn't a guess. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the boredom of a teacher correcting a math error. If you shoot me, we hit that concrete pylon at 60 miles an hour. You aren't wearing a seatbelt. I am. She tapped the brake lightly, just enough to throw him off balance, forcing his chest into the back of her seat. You aren't robbing me, boy. You're interviewing. Nico's breath fogged the window. Interviewing? My previous driver lacked initiative. You, on the other hand, have initiative. You lack brains, but we can fix that. She signaled a left turn, the indicator ticking like a metronome, counting down his remaining seconds of freedom. Climb over. Nico stared at the back of her head, paralyzed. What? The front seat. Join me. I don't like shouting. I have a gun, Nico whispered, the threat sounding hollow even to his own ears. And I have where you're going to die if you don't start climbing. Holster the weapon. Over the console. Now. It was the now that did it. It wasn't a scream. It was a command cut from cold steel. Nico looked at the locked door. He looked at the speedometer climbing past 70. With a humiliated grunt, he lowered the pistol, tucking it into his waistband with shaking fingers. He awkwardly scrambled between the seats, knees hitting the center console, boots scuffing the pristine dashboard, reducing himself from an armed predator to a clumsy passenger in seconds. He collapsed into the leather bucket seat beside her, breathless and sweating. The scent of her perfume, something sharp, like winter air and gunpowder, filled his nose. Alara Vescari didn't look at him. She just pressed a button on the door panel, locking him in from the front as well. Buckle up, she said softly, accelerating into the dark. The interview starts now. Punch these in, Alara said, her voice cutting through the hum of the tires on wet asphalt. She didn't look at him. She just gestured vaguely toward the glowing infotainment screen. Terminal 4 at the Naval Yard. Do not miss the turn. Nico's fingers hovered over the touchscreen. They were still shaking. He punched in the address, and the GPS chirped a cheerful calculation. 22 minutes to destination. The Naval Yard? Nico asked, his voice cracking. That's abandoned. There's nothing out there but rust and rats. And tonight, a meeting, Alara corrected. She adjusted the rearview mirror again, her eyes scanning the dark road behind them for headlights that lingered too long. A negotiation with a faction that believes they can restructure my territory. They demanded I come alone. No guards. No entourage. Nico swallowed hard. So you're bringing me? I'm bringing a driver, she said. There is a difference. The car hydroplaned slightly over a puddle, and Alara corrected the slide with a microscopic flick of her wrist. The movement was so casual, so practiced, it terrified him more than the gun had. Why? Nico asked. You have an army. I've heard the stories. You have men who would die to drive this car. I did, Alara said. The dashboard lights cast hollow shadows across her face, turning her cheekbones into blades. My usual driver was extremely loyal. He was also found an hour ago in the trunk of his own sedan with a piano wire tightened around his throat. The air in the car seemed to drop 10 degrees. Nico stopped breathing. He looked at her, searching for a joke, a lie, anything to soften the blow. There was nothing. Just the flat, terrifying boredom of a woman discussing the weather. They compromised my inner circle, she continued, tapping her fingers lightly on the leather wheel. If I used one of my own men tonight, I wouldn't know if he was driving me to a meeting or an execution. But you, she finally glanced at him, a half-second assessment that stripped him down to his bones. You are nobody. You have no allegiances, no debts to my enemies. You are a variable they didn't account for. Nico sank back into the seat, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He wasn't a partner. He wasn't even a hostage. I'm the canary, he whispered. You're sending me in to see if the air is poisonous. If the car explodes when you start the engine, Alara said, turning onto the desolate service road that led to the docks, it saves me the trouble of dry cleaning my suit. Drive fast, Nico. Don't make us late. Nico's knuckles were white against the leather wheel. His breathing came in short, jagged hitches that fogged the windshield faster than the defroster could clear it. The speedometer wavered, 70, 75, 60. Pick a speed, Alara said, her voice cutting through the panic like a scalpel. And breathe. You're useless to me if you pass out. I'm not going to pass out, Nico snapped, though his voice cracked on the last syllable. You are, she countered. Your grip is too tight. Your peripheral vision is narrowing. You're in fight or flight, and since you can't run, your body is trying to shut down. She adjusted her cufflink, staring out at the rain-streaked industrial wasteland passing by. Tell me why you did it. Nico glanced at her, confused. What? The car. The gun. You aren't a professional. A professional would have noticed the armored glass. A professional would have waited until I was at a red light, not a stop sign. You're desperate. Who do you owe? Nico swallowed hard, his eyes darting back to the road. It doesn't matter. It matters if it affects your driving. How much? 40,000, Nico whispered. To a guy who breaks fingers for late fees and kneecaps for principles. Alara let out a short, dry sound. It might have been a laugh. 40,000? You put a gun to the head of a syndicate boss for the price of a used sedan. I didn't know who you were. That is exactly the problem, Alara said, turning in her seat to face him fully. You didn't scout the target. You didn't assess the risk. You saw a shiny object and grabbed it like a magpie. That isn't crime, Nico. That's suicide. I didn't have a choice. There is always a choice. You chose the sloppy one. She pointed a manicured finger at the windshield. Keep your eyes up. You're drifting. Nico corrected the wheel, resentment bubbling under his fear. I don't need a lecture on technique from the woman I'm about to get killed. On the contrary, Alara said, her eyes cold and sharp in the dashboard glow. If you survive tonight, it will be because you stopped thinking like a victim and started thinking like a predator. Look at the road, Nico. Stop looking for the police. Stop looking for your lone shark. Look for the thread I tell you to look for. She leaned back, the leather creaking softly. You held the gun wrong, by the way. Too close to the body. If I had wanted to disarm you, I would have broken your wrist before you pulled the trigger. Nico's grip on the wheel tightened, but his breathing slowed. The terror was still there, but it was focusing, sharpening into something useful. You're crazy, he muttered. I'm alive, Alara replied. Let's see if we can keep it that way. The sedan rolled to a silent stop on the cracked pavement of Pier 9. The warehouse loomed ahead like the ribcage of a rotting beast, corrugated iron sheets flapping in the wind, windows shattered, the darkness inside total and absolute. The rain drummed a frantic rhythm against the roof, but inside the car, the air was still and warm. Keep the engine running, Alara said. She unbuckled her seatbelt, the sound sharp in the quiet cabin. And keep the headlights off. If you see headlights approaching from the east, kill the engine and duck. Nico gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. You're going in there alone? You said it was a trap. It is, she replied, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror. She wasn't looking for vanity. She was checking for fear. There was none. She smoothed the lapel of her jacket, concealing the slim profile of a blade she hadn't mentioned. But if I don't walk in, I don't find out who said it. She reached for the door handle, then paused. The interior light flickered on, illuminating the terrified sweat on Nico's brow. 10 minutes, she said. Nico blinked. What? If I am not back in 10 minutes, put the car in drive and leave. She gestured vaguely to the opulent dashboard. Take it. Sell it. Chop it for parts. It's worth 6 figures. That pays your debt and buys you a ticket to somewhere the rain doesn't fall. Nico stared at her, his mouth slightly open. It was the dream scenario. The exact thing he had tried to steal an hour ago was being handed to him on a silver platter. But looking at Alara, at the terrifying calm in her eyes, he felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Why? He whispered. Because if I'm not back in 10 minutes, I'm dead, Alara said simply. And my security team will be tracking this GPS signal to recover my body. You'll have a 20-minute head start before they realize I'm not the one driving. If you're fast, you might live. It wasn't a gift. It was a test. It was a psychological cage match. She was betting that his fear of her ghost was stronger than his greed for her car. She opened the door, and the smell of brine, rust, and ozone flooded the cabin. 10 minutes, Nico. Don't waste them. She stepped out into the rain. The door clicked shut. Nico watched her walk toward the gaping maw of the warehouse, a silhouette in a dark suit walking straight into the throat of a monster, and realized with a jolt of horror that he wasn't terrified she would die. He was terrified of what would happen if she didn't. Nico watched her go. She didn't look back. She walked across the cracked pavement with a stride that was terrifyingly rhythmic, her heels clicking against the concrete like a countdown. She moved not like a woman entering a negotiation, but like a bullet entering a chamber. Then, the darkness of the warehouse mouth swallowed her whole. Inside the sedan, the silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. The engine purred, a low, vibrationless hum that whispered money. Nico looked down at his hands. They were still trembling, but now they were free. He looked at the digital clock on the dash. 9 minutes, 40 seconds. He wrapped his hand around the gear shift. The leather was cool, smooth. All he had to do was pull it down into drive, press the gas, and he was gone. He could be 3 miles away before the first shot was fired. He could be in another state by morning. The debt, the loan shark, the fear of having a gun to his head, it all ended right here. He was sitting in the solution to every problem he had. Go, his brain screamed. She gave you the out. Take it. He began to pull the shifter, but his eyes drifted back to the warehouse. The rain smeared the windshield, but through a jagged hole in the corrugated siding, he saw movement. Not on the ground floor where Alara had walked, but high up. In the rafters, a shadow detached itself from a steel beam. Then another. They moved with the jerky, insect-like precision of men trying not to be seen. A barrel caught a stray beam of light from the docks. A rifle scope, long and matte black, trained on the center of the floor. Nico froze. It wasn't a meeting. It wasn't even an ambush. It was an execution. He looked at the empty passenger seat. He looked at the shifter in his hand. If he drove away now, he was rich. If he stayed, he was dead. It was the easiest math in the world. But he remembered the way she had looked at him in the rearview mirror. Not with fear, but with a cold assessment. You are a variable they didn't account for. She knew. She had walked in there knowing the ceiling was full of vultures, betting her life on the slim chance that the thief in her car had more nerve than he looked. Nico cursed, a low, vicious sound in the quiet cabin. His hand hovered over the gear stick, paralyzed between the instinct to run and a sudden, stupid refusal to be the coward she expected him to be. The negotiation lasted exactly 4 seconds. Alara stood in the center of the warehouse floor, her hands empty, her posture relaxed. The man stepping out of the shadows wasn't the faction leader she expected. He was a lieutenant. A nobody. That was the tell. Management has decided to restructure, the lieutenant said, raising a hand. Alara didn't wait for the signal. She moved. The first bullet chipped the concrete an inch from her heel. The second tore through the sleeve of her jacket as she dove behind a rusting shipping container. High above, muzzle flashes sparked like faulty wiring in the rafters. 3 shooters high, 2 on the ground, she calculated, pressing her back against the cold steel. She drew her weapon, checking the magazine. 12 rounds. Against 5 rifles. The math was bad. She leaned out, firing 2 controlled shots. One shadow on the ground dropped. The rifles in the rafters answered with a hail of lead that chewed the edge of the container, pinning her down. Concrete dust filled the air, tasting like chalk and blood. She was trapped. For the first time in a decade, Alara Vescari checked her exits and found none. Outside, Nico heard the shots. They didn't sound like movies. They sounded like flat, ugly pops against the drumbeat of the rain. He gripped the gear shift. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The logical part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive as a thief, screamed at him to drive away. The car was running. The road was open. He could be gone. But he looked at the warehouse doors. He thought about the woman who had locked him in the car and told him to stop acting like a victim. If she died, he was just a guy in a stolen car with a price on his head. If she lived, he didn't make a conscious decision. Instinct, raw and stupid, took over. Nico slammed his foot onto the accelerator. The V12 engine roared, a feral snarl that drowned out the gunfire. He didn't aim for the road. He aimed for the bay doors. The heavy sedan hit the corrugated metal like a cannonball. The doors buckled and tore apart with a screech of rending steel that sounded like the end of the world. Glass shattered. Metal flew. The car exploded into the warehouse, tires spinning on the slick concrete floor. Nico didn't brake. He yanked the wheel hard to the left, pulling the handbrake. The car drifted. It slid sideways in a perfect, uncontrolled arc, screaming across the kill zone. It was a maneuver born of panic, not skill, but the result was the same. The heavy, armored chassis of the sedan slammed to a halt directly between Alara and the gunman, a 2-ton wall of German engineering absorbing the bullets meant for her. The passenger door was facing her. Inside, Nico was hyperventilating, his hands frozen to the wheel, staring wide-eyed at the bullet spiderwebbing the reinforced glass inches from his face. He unlocked the doors. "Get in," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Get in." Alara threw herself into the passenger seat a split second before the side window disintegrated into a spray of diamond dust. She didn't scream. She didn't duck. She locked the door and shouted one word over the roar of the engine. "Drive." Nico didn't think. He didn't check his mirrors. He stomped the accelerator to the floor, and the heavy sedan surged forward like a missile leaving the rail. The tires spun on the slick concrete, finding traction just as a fresh volley of gunfire chewed up the leather of the back seat. Nico yanked the wheel hard to the right, drifting the car around a forklift and shooting back out through the twisted wreckage of the bay doors. The night air hit them like a physical blow, cold, wet, and smelling of ozone. "Left," Alara commanded, pressing a hand to her shoulder. Nico swung left, the rear end of the car fishtailing violently on the rain-slicked cobblestones. He corrected the slide with a twitch of his wrists, a move so instinctive he didn't know he possessed it until it saved their lives. He wove through the maze of shipping containers, dodging a blocking SUV by mounting the curb and scraping the undercarriage with a shower of sparks. He took the on-ramp to the highway at 80 miles an hour, merging into traffic with a recklessness that bordered on art. The gunfire faded behind them, replaced by the rhythmic thump-thump of the tires on the expansion joints. Only then did Nico exhale. His lungs burned. His hands were fused to the steering wheel, vibrating with the residual energy of the machine. "You missed the turn for the safe house," Alara said. Her voice was strained, but steady. Nico glanced over, panic flaring again. I didn't know. Keep going. We'll take the scenic route." She pulled a silk handkerchief from her pocket and pressed it against her upper arm. Dark crimson bloomed instantly against the white fabric. A graze. Painful, but not lethal. Nico stared at the blood, his stomach churning. "You're hit. I've had worse from better marksmen," she murmured. She looked at him, really looked at him, her eyes glittering in the passing streetlights. The cold, dead stare was gone. In its place was something electric. She was smiling. It wasn't a nice smile. It was feral, bloody, and terrifyingly alive. "You drive better when you're being shot at, Nico," she said, wincing as she adjusted her seat. "I might have to shoot at you more often." Nico let out a breathless, hysterical laugh. The terror that had defined his night was gone, burned away by the adrenaline. He looked at the blood on her jacket, then at the road ahead. He wasn't a hostage anymore. He was the wheelman. "Just tell me where to go," he said, pressing the gas. I'll get us there. The black sedan, now scarred with bullet holes and scraped paint, rolled into the subterranean garage of a building that didn't exist on any city map. The heavy steel gate rattled shut behind them, cutting off the rain and the sirens. Silence returned, heavier than before. Nico turned off the engine. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was waiting. He kept his hands on the steering wheel, staring at the concrete wall ahead. The adrenaline that had fueled his driving was evaporating, leaving behind a cold, shivering clarity. He had just kidnapped a crime boss, driven her into a war zone, and seen her bleed. He knew where her safe house was. He knew her face. In his world, people got killed for knowing less. Unlock the doors, Alara said. Nico flinched. He unlocked them. He waited for the sound of a suppressor, the cold press of metal against his temple. It was the logical next step. He was a loose end, and Alara Vescari was a woman who didn't tolerate fraying. Instead, he heard the tap of a screen. Alara was scrolling through her phone with her good hand, the bloody handkerchief still pressed to her shoulder. She didn't look like a woman who had just survived an assassination attempt. She looked like a CEO reviewing a quarterly report. Sector 4. The warehouse, she said into the phone. Her voice was flat, devoid of the feral energy she'd shown in the car. Burn it. Leave nothing but ash. And send a recovery team to my location for the vehicle. It's distressed. She hung up. She looked at Nico. He stopped breathing. I didn't see anything, he said quickly, the words tumbling out. I don't know where we are. I don't know who you are. I'll walk away. You'll never see me again. Alara studied him. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, 10. Then, she reached into the glove box. Nico squeezed his eyes shut. The loan shark, she said. Nico opened his eyes. She wasn't holding a gun. She was holding a notepad and a silver pen. What? The man you owe $40,000 to, Alara said, clicking the pen. The one who made you desperate enough to put a gun to my neck. Give me a name. Why? Because you drove well, Nico. Better than well. You saved my life. She looked at the blood on her sleeve, then back at him. Vescaris pay their debts. I'm going to pay yours. Nico stared at her. You're going to give him the money? Alara's lips curved into a faint, terrifying smile. I didn't say I was going to pay him money. I said I was going to handle the debt. Give me the name. Marcus Vane, Nico whispered. Alara wrote it down. She tore the page out, folded it, and put it in her pocket. Marcus Vane, she repeated, testing the syllables. Don't worry about him. By morning, he won't be in a position to collect. The morning sun was gray, filtering through the city smog like dirty water. The rain had finally stopped, but the streets were still slick, reflecting the steel and glass of the skyline. Nico stood on the sidewalk outside the safe house, his jacket stiff with dried sweat and rain, feeling like a ghost haunting his own life. Alara Vescari stepped out of the heavy steel door. She was immaculate. The blood-soaked jacket was gone, replaced by a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Nico had earned in his entire life. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her face was a mask of indifferent perfection. Only a slight, almost imperceptible stiffness in her left shoulder betrayed the violence of the night before. She didn't say hello. She simply extended a thick manila envelope. Nico took it. It was heavy. 40,000, Alara said. Her voice was back to the cool, boardroom monotone of the car. Small bills. Marcus Vane will accept it, and he will forget your name. If he doesn't, tell him to call me. Nico gripped the envelope. It was his freedom. It was the end of the fear that had been eating him alive for months. He opened his mouth to say thank you, to say goodbye, but Alara was already moving. She reached into her pocket and tossed a key fob through the air. Nico caught it instinctively. It was heavy, black, and brand new. The sedan is toast, she said, pulling on black leather gloves to hide any lingering tremors. There is an Audi RS7 parked around the corner. It's registered in your name. Don't scratch it. Nico looked at the key, then at her. The math didn't add up. I don't understand. I kidnapped you. I put a gun to your head. And then you drove through a firing squad to get me out, Alara corrected. She stepped closer, invading his space just enough to remind him of the power dynamic. She wasn't looking at him with gratitude. She was looking at him like an investment. Good help is hard to find, Nico. Loyal help is impossible. She checked her watch, a subtle, dismissive gesture that signaled the conversation was over. Be at the Vescari Tower at 8 a.m. sharp, she said, turning toward the waiting security detail that had finally arrived to reclaim their queen. My schedule is tight, and I need a driver who checks his mirrors. She got into the back of the waiting SUV without looking back. Nico stood alone on the wet pavement. He held the money in one hand and the key in the other. He could run. He could take the 40 grand, sell the car, and disappear. But as he watched Alara's convoy disappear into the morning traffic, he knew he wouldn't. The thief who had climbed into her car last night was gone. In his place was something else. Something valuable. He squeezed the key fob until the metal bit into his palm. He wasn't free. He was Vescry property now. And for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he was going.